What if the aliens we've been searching for are actually us from the future? Dr. Mike Masters, an expert in human evolution and time travel, explores this mind-bending theory. With insights from archaeology, physics, and thousands of abduction cases, this episode uncovers the possibility that UFOs are piloted by our future descendants. Buckle up as we dive into the science and implications of this fascinating idea. From endless talks that never end and documents you won't defend, what no one cared to ever read, we bring to life with perfect speed. Welcome to another Missing Time podcast.
Okay, so you've been diving into some pretty mind-blowing stuff. Time travel, aliens, the future of humanity, all rolled into one.
It's a theory that really captures the imagination, doesn't it? And Dr. Masters' work really dives deep into the potential implications. Yeah, exploring everything from those evolutionary trends to the very nature of time itself.
Right, and one of the things that really jumped out at me from your research was this whole idea that UFO sightings have actually been, decreasing since the 1990s, which seems counterintuitive, right? If these really are our descendants just popping in for a visit, shouldn't we be seeing them more often as technology advances? I mean, what's your take on that?
It's a great question, and it's something Dr. Masters actually addresses pretty direct. He suggests that this decrease in sightings, might actually be a sign of the hybrid program being successful.
Okay, now we have to talk about this hybrid program.
Sure.
What exactly does Dr. Masters even mean by that, and what does it tell us about, the potential motives of these time travelers?
So he argues that these future humans, they could be coming back to gather genetic material, essentially diversifying their gene pool. And it's a pretty wild concept, I know, but he suggests that humans might be facing a genetic bottleneck in the future.
Good.
Due to things like overpopulation or even, something like in vitro fertilization.
So they're coming back to the past to, ensure the survival of their species.
Potentially, yeah.
But if that's the case, why all the secrecy?
Right.
Why not just, introduce themselves and explain what's going on?
Well, that's where things get a little more complicated. Dr. Masters suggests that that open contact like that might actually be impossible or even dangerous.
Okay.
Due to the paradoxical nature of time travel.
Right.
Any action they take in the past could have, these ripple effects that could actually alter their own timeline.
It's like the butterfly effect, but on a cosmic scale.
Exactly.
But if they're being so subtle, how does gathering genetic material even work? Are we talking about, full-on alien abductions here?
Well, that's where things get really, really interesting. Dr. Masters actually connects the classic gray alien description with these long-term evolutionary trends in humans. He points to craniofacial feminization, the idea that our faces are becoming smaller and more delicate over time.
Right. I remember reading about that in his book. Yeah. Big eyes, small mouths, large brains. It's almost like they're looking at a future human where those features have become even more, exaggerated.
Exactly. And he also talks about paedomorphism, which is the retention of childlike features in adults.
Okay.
This could explain, that often described childlike appearance of certain alien beings.
So we're, seeing echoes of our own evolutionary future in these encounters.
Potentially, yes.
Okay, so we're starting to see how this hybrid program might play out.
Right.
But what about the actual mechanics of time travel itself? How would they even get here?
Right.
In one of the podcasts you shared, Dr. Masters suggests that the very shape of many UFOs might actually hold clues to their time-bending abilities.
Yeah, this is where the science fiction starts to sound a lot like science fact. Remember those classic flying saucer shapes?
Of course.
Dr. Masters argues that those disc-like forms are strikingly similar to some theoretical models of time travel devices.
Wow.
He delves into the work of physicists like Frank Tipler, who proposed that rapidly spinning disc-shaped objects could potentially warp space-time.
Hold on. Warp space-time. What does that even mean in, practical terms?
Okay, so we're talking about creating what physicists call closed time-like curves.
Okay.
Essentially pathways back to the past.
Okay.
And while the concept is incredibly complex, the basic idea really revolves around generating extremely strong gravitational fields, which, according to Einstein's theory of relativity, can be achieved by spinning an object at incredible speeds.
So the faster something spins, the more it distorts gravity, and the distortion could, potentially open a doorway through time.
In a very, very simplified way, yes.
It sounds like something straight out of a movie.
It does, doesn't it? But the math behind it is actually grounded in real physics.
Wow.
And this isn't just about spinning really, really fast. It might also require something called exotic matter.
Exotic matter. Okay, you're going to have to explain that one. I'm picturing something glowing green and pulsating.
It's not quite as visually dramatic as that.
Yeah.
Exotic matter is a hypothetical type of matter that's theorized to have negative mass. Essentially, instead of attracting other objects with gravity, it would repel them.
Okay, so, if you'll forgive the pun, negative mass creates negative gravity.
In a sense, yes.
Okay, so how would you even get your hands on something like that, let alone make it spin fast enough to, warp time?
Those are questions that even Dr. Masters doesn't have definitive answers to.
Right.
But he does suggest that the kinds of technologies needed for time travel, manipulating gravity, harnessing exotic matter, would be so far beyond our current understanding that they might as well be magic.
It makes you wonder if what we perceive as UFOs, right, are simply glimpses of technology so advanced that it just appears supernatural to us.
It's possible.
It would explain why sightings often involve these seemingly impossible maneuvers, right? Things like sudden acceleration, defying gravity, disappearing and reappearing.
Exactly. Dr. Masters argues that those abilities might be explained by, by their mastery over space-time.
Yeah.
If they can manipulate the very fabric of reality, then our understanding of physics just wouldn't apply.
It's almost as if they're, like, bending the rules of the universe to suit their needs. Which makes you wonder, if they can manipulate time and space with such ease, why haven't they made themselves more known to us?
It might be about minimizing paradoxes, Or maybe it's even some form of cosmic non-interference.
Okay.
But Dr. Masters, he also proposes this fascinating concept, the sphere of influence.
A sphere of influence. Okay, that sounds a little ominous.
Right.
What is that? Exactly.
So imagine, this bubble of warped reality surrounding their craft. A localized distortion of time and space.
Okay.
Anyone or anything inside this sphere might experience time differently, but outside of it, they'd be practically invisible.
That's kind of terrifying, but also incredibly cool.
Right.
Could this be an explanation for why so many abduction stories involve, missing time? People losing hours or even days with no memory of where they've been?
It's definitely a possibility, yeah.
Wow.
It could also explain why we don't have these, constant traffic jams of time-traveling UFOs just zipping around all over the place.
Right.
They're not just difficult to detect, they might be operating on an entirely different temporal frequency, slipping through the cracks of our perception of time.
Okay, so they're being incredibly careful, incredibly discreet for whatever reason.
Right.
But we still haven't touched on why they might choose to visit our particular moment in history. Any insights into that from Dr. Masters?
Well, beyond the hybrid program, he dives into the idea that our era might actually hold a specific significance for them.
Good.
Maybe there's a pivotal event, a crossroads in human history that they're interested in observing or even potentially subtly influencing.
That makes me think about those reports of UFOs appearing during major historical events, like wars or natural disasters.
Right.
It's almost like they're bearing witness to our capacity for both destruction and resilience.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of a sobering thought to consider that our actions might be scrutinized by, these descendants with a much broader perspective on time and consequence.
Right.
It makes you wonder if they're simply recording history as it unfolds or if they might be, playing a role in shaping it.
Okay, but hold on a second. Earlier, you mentioned the block universe theory.
Right.
If the past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, how can they change anything at all?
Right.
Wouldn't their actions already be woven into, the fabric of this predetermined timeline?
That's the paradox, isn't it? It's a concept that really challenges our, linear understanding of cause and effect.
Yeah.
Dr. Masters suggests that even if they are bound by some predetermined timeline, right, their actions might actually be essential to, fulfilling it.
Okay.
Think of it less like changing the past and more like fulfilling a destiny that's already been set in motion, in a way.
So free will versus determinism, but on a cosmic scale.
Exactly.
It still raises the question, though, are we really in control of our own destiny? Or are these time-traveling descendants, pulling the strings from behind the scenes?
It's definitely a dizzying thought, yeah.
Yeah.
And Dr. Masters doesn't shy away from, those unsettling implications.
Right.
He argues that this theory forces us to confront the possibility that, we might not be the sole authors of our own history.
That's a lot to process.
Yeah.
But if we, shift gears for a moment, assuming they're not here to manipulate us, could there be, a more altruistic motive? What if they're actually trying to guide us towards a better future?
Okay.
Maybe, those cryptic messages, the warnings about, environmental disaster or nuclear war that are often reported by abductees, maybe those are their way of kind of nudging us in a better direction.
That's definitely a much more optimistic take, and it's one that resonates with a lot of people.
Right.
Perhaps these aren't, malevolent overlords or indifferent observers, but, descendants who genuinely care about the fate of their ancestors and the planet they came from.
Right. If those warnings are coming from our future selves, it implies that we actually do have a chance to change course, to, avert those disasters. It brings a whole new meaning to the phrase, learn from your mistakes.
It really does, yeah.
And maybe that's the ultimate message, right? That these potential time travelers are trying to convey to us.
Possibly, yeah.
That even if the future is in some ways predetermined, our choices still matter. They still have the power to shape the, trajectory of humanity.
It's a powerful thought.
Okay, that's actually a strangely comforting thought.
Yeah.
It gives us some agency back.
Right.
But let's talk about the specifics of those warnings.
Sure.
In one of Dr. Masters' podcasts you shared, he talks about how a lot of these alleged alien encounters, they seem to have this recurring theme. Protect the environment, stop fighting amongst ourselves. It's pretty straightforward advice, honestly.
It is interesting, isn't it? The messages are often described as being very direct, devoid of any kind of religious or ideological dogma.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're going for the most universal, timeless wisdom they can offer.
Which, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense.
Right.
If you could travel through time, you'd probably gain a pretty clear understanding of what really matters in, the grand scheme of things.
Right.
And I bet that environmental destruction and, pointless conflict wouldn't be high on that list.
It's definitely a humbling thought.
Yeah.
And one that Dr. Masters uses to encourage a sense of cosmic responsibility. If we are being watched, studied, perhaps even guided by these, future descendants, then our actions take on a whole new weight.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is.
But shifting gears a bit, you've already touched on how the science behind time travel might actually work, at least in theory.
Right.
But what about the nuts and bolts of it all? Are we talking about souped up DeLoreans here, or is there another way to, bend time?
So Dr. Masters explores, various theoretical possibilities.
Right.
But the one that aligns most closely with, these UFO sightings involves manipulating gravity.
Okay.
And a crucial element in this is something called a closed time-like curve, which we touched on briefly earlier.
Right. You mentioned that it's essentially a pathway back to the past. But how do you actually create one of these curves?
Okay, so think of it like this. Imagine space-time as this giant sheet, right? A massive object, like a star, creates a dip in this sheet, which we experience as gravity. Now, if you could spin an object fast enough, and we're talking incomprehensibly fast, you could potentially create a loop in space-time.
So it's not just about going fast. It's about, distorting the very fabric of reality itself.
Precisely. And to create a distortion powerful enough to form a closed time-like curve, you would need to manipulate gravity on a scale that, honestly, defies our current technological capabilities.
Right.
Dr. Masters suggests that this is where exotic matter might come into play.
Right. That hypothetical stuff with negative mass.
Exactly.
But if it's so hypothetical, how could it even be used for something like time travel?
So the theory goes that if you could generate and harness exotic matter, right, should it potentially be used to create a wormhole. Think of it like a shortcut through space-time connecting two distant points. And if you could control the entry and exit points of this wormhole, you could theoretically travel to different points in time.
Okay, I'm definitely getting some serious science fiction vibes here.
It's getting pretty out there, yeah.
So we're talking about wormholes, exotic matter, manipulating gravity. It's almost as if the technology Dr. Masters is describing is indistinguishable from magic.
It's a concept that really pushes the very boundaries of our understanding,
Yeah.
But But one of the most compelling aspects of Dr. Masters' work is that he doesn't shy away from those, like, mind-boggling possibilities, right?
Right.
He embraces the mystery while still grounding his theories in, established scientific principles.
That's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. It blurs the line between, like, science and science fiction.
It really does.
And it makes you wonder, if time travel is within the realm of possibility, what other, like, seemingly impossible feats might these beings be capable of?
It certainly opens up a Pandora's box of questions, doesn't it?
It really does.
And one of the most intriguing is this concept of the sphere of influence, which we touched on earlier.
Right, that bubble of, like, warped reality around their craft.
Yeah.
If they can control time and space within that sphere,
Right.
what does that mean for the people and objects inside?
It's a good question.
It's almost like they're stepping outside of
Yeah.
our reality,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Experiencing time on a, like, totally different track.
Exactly. And that actually leads to one of the most mind-bending implications of Dr. Masters' work. The idea that these encounters might not just be about time travel, but also about something even more profound. The potential for consciousness to exist beyond our linear perception of time.
Okay, now you're really blowing my mind here.
It's out there, right?
Are you suggesting that they've somehow, like, transcended our understanding of life and death?
It's a question that has, intrigued philosophers and scientists for centuries, right? I mean, if time travel is possible,
Right.
it really challenges our very definition of mortality.
Right.
Imagine, right, being able to revisit any point in your own past.
Wow.
Or even project your consciousness forward into the future.
So rather than a straight line from, like, birth to death,
Right.
our existence might be more like a boundless loop, a continuous cycle of past, present, and future, all, like, intertwined.
It's a concept that Dr. Masters connects to, like, those ancient spiritual traditions, many of which view time as cyclical rather than linear.
Right.
And if these time travelers have, mastered this aspect of reality, it could explain why they seem to possess, knowledge and abilities that defy our current understanding.
It's like a whole other layer to this whole thing. It's not just advanced technology. It's a, like, completely different relationship with the fabric of reality itself.
Right.
But okay, if they've reached that level of understanding,
Right.
what does that mean for us? Are they, like, trying to teach us to elevate our own consciousness?
It's possible, although, Dr. Masters cautions against assuming their intentions are, like, that straightforward.
Okay.
He suggests that we might be, this is kind of a humbling thought.
Yeah.
He suggests that we might be akin to, like, ants under a magnifying glass. Oh, wow.
Fascinating to observe, even worthy of study,
Right.
but ultimately bound by a level of understanding that they've long since surpassed.
So we're back to the ant under the magnifying glass analogy.
It's a little humbling, yeah.
It is humbling. Okay, but even if we're not quite ready for, like, a cosmic consciousness upgrade,
Right.
are there any takeaways from Dr. Masters' work that we can, like, apply to our own lives right now?
I think one of the most powerful messages in Dr. Masters' work is this idea that, that our choices have consequences, right?
Yeah.
Consequences that echo throughout time.
Okay.
And if we can view ourselves as part of this grand interconnected web of past, present, and future, our actions just take on, like, a whole new level of significance, don't they?
Yeah.
It's a call to awareness, right? To consider the long-term impact of our decisions, both, big and small.
Absolutely.
And maybe, like, perhaps most importantly, it's a reminder that we are not alone in the universe.
Right, exactly. Whether these beings are, time travelers from our future or visitors from another dimension or something else entirely,
Right.
their presence, it reminds us that reality is far stranger and more wondrous than we often give it credit for.
It really is enough to make you want to, like, look up at the sky every night and wonder.
It really is.
This deep dive has really left me with, honestly, more questions than answers.
Sure.
But in a good way.
Right.
It sparked a sense of, like, awe and curiosity that I haven't felt in a long time.
That's great to hear.
It really is.
Yeah.
So to our listener out there,
Yes.
if you are as captivated by this topic as we are, I highly, highly encourage you to check out Dr. Masters' work.
Please do.
It's a wild ride, full of these fascinating theories and thought-provoking ideas that, honestly, they'll stay with you long after you finish listening, I guarantee it.
They really will. And, keep exploring those intriguing threads that you've been uncovering in your own research. You never know what mind-bending connections you might find.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Well, until next time, keep looking up, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.
I love it.